is head straight into the panel. If we can just therefore share who are our panelists today, joining Deborah, that's great. We've got a great panel lined up for you. We've got Damien McKnight from Dovecoat Park. Thanks, Damien, for being with us. We've got Nici MP, also, of course, chair of the Apprenticeship Diversity Champions Network. We've got Lucy Hunte, National Programme Manager from Health Education England, Jeff Greenidge, Director of Diversity at AAC and ETF. And we've also got none other than our very own Lauren Roberts, who's our Youth Engagement lead for City and Guilds. So welcome everybody. Thank you for being with us. I'm sure, like me, you thoroughly enjoyed that very, very real and very human perspective from Deborah. And we're gonna get into quite a lot of that now through a number of sort of questions I just want to explore with each of you. But remember, a moment ago, or at the beginning, I said that we had a poll, a very quick poll. So we asked the audience earlier to vote on this very quite straightforward question, really. And the question was, and we put it up now on the screen, how many of you have a diversity and inclusion, no unfortunate use of the word belonging, Deborah, there, but have a diversity and inclusion strategy in your business today? Well, you know, fairly straightforward question. So what did the audience answer? You probably, well, let's see if you are surprised, panel, or not. 90.9% answered yes, they've got a strategy. 6.1% said no, and 3% don't know. But of course, it's easy to have a strategy. It's what you do with the strategy that matters, right? So let's just have a very quick chat about the poll before we go into the main questions. Let me first maybe come to you, Leah. Are you surprised by that result, that over 90% say, yeah, we've got a strategy, but what's happening with that strategy?
Well, I don't know the makeup of the audience, but I did talk to one of your team yesterday, and we discussed this, and I said, actually, that isn't surprising at all. In fact, I'm surprised it's actually quite so low. The issue is, as you pointed out, isn't whether you have a strategy, a piece of paper that somebody in HR who's done the research and has written it all down. What actually matters is implementing that strategy, and implementing that strategy in a way where it's actually going to be effective. It's no good having a strategy and then doing business in exactly the same way. You have to actually do something different. You have to communicate with people from a wider, broad base. And sometimes that can be difficult for the private sector in particular, because from a business perspective, quite often you need to employ somebody now quickly because there's an essential need rather than a strategic. So that's what we need to encourage businesses to do, is think about more strategically. The other day at an ADCN meeting, we had a really great case study of Nottingham City Housing, where actually they think differently and they go out and they actually speak to people. And when parents or family members come along, they nab them for apprenticeships as well, which was an absolutely fantastic way of working. So it's really about strategy and thinking differently, not just having the bit of paper.
No, exactly. And I think Deborah made us sing, didn't she, a moment ago, with those great examples about the, do you go to the school reunion or turn up at your unannounced at your family's anniversary or something, you know, about that sense of belonging again. You mentioned there about the sort of corporates. Let me just, I mean, I'm not going to spend too long, by the way, on the poll, so I want to get into the questions, just want to get a couple of perspectives. Damien, of course, from an employer's perspective, what's your take on the fact, I'm sure you definitely will have a strategy. I know that you got a commendation for the fact that you have a really good inclusion and diversity strategy as a result of winning one of the Princess Royal Training Awards. But what's your take on that?
Well, the strategy we've got at Dovecoat Park is that we only employ apprentices now. We've been doing it over the last 2 years. So we're up to 120 plus now apprentices. And we've seen, obviously, through the Princess Royal Training Award, we've seen a massive return on investment from doing that. And it's changed the culture as well. We've got a learning culture, an inclusive culture. It is hard to get across to the board from, like, it just took us 2 or 3 years to get where we are. But once I start seeing it on the line and I start investing in it, and it's been really good. Looking at other sectors, because other companies in our sector, they've visited us and stuff like that. We've tried to show them, and I think it's just about exposure.
Yeah.
Trying to get the message out. Look what you can do if you invest the time in it, and the benefits of doing it.
Great, thanks, Damien. And Deborah, if I may just give you the last word on the poll before we then get into the full panel debate. I mean, what's your perspective on the fact that, you know, we've got over 90% of our audience today, all of them, many of them involved in delivering, all of them involved in delivering skills and apprenticeships, saying, great, we've got a strategy. What's your sort of hypothesis on how in which they're actually living the strategy, given what you were just saying before about belonging?
Oh, gosh, I mean, I'm just so thrilled that they've got a strategy, to be honest. And I think this is really optimistic, and I think it's just always thinking, what's the experience like? So look at your strategy and go, great, we've got a recruitment process, we've got an onboarding process. Now, what might that experience be like? And actually sort of almost like walk through it, sort of just do a day in the life. I was at a very I don't mean to brag, but I'm forced to on this occasion. I've had my hair done yesterday, gang. It's been a long time, months. If you'd seen me at the event I did on Tuesday, it didn't look like this. They've made it all chic, but I was at a really nice hairdresser. But when I was having my hair washed and I was back in the basin, I thought the ceiling's sort of a bit old and cracked. And I thought, if I owned a hairdresser, I'd like do some kind of fabulous wallpaper on the ceiling, because people spend so much time their hair back doing that. And you know, what are they seeing? What are they experiencing? So if I went through that user experience of pretending to be first day on the job, or send somebody in, you know, and again, a great way of simulating things is just to listen, is to do an anonymous discussion with all the apprentices I've been through. What was it like? How welcome did you really feel? Yep. What was that like? Because all of your best intentions can be scuppered by some part of that experience just being, I mean, it doesn't really matter if there's wallpaper on the ceiling, obviously, but it does matter if you were made to feel unwelcome, or you were made to feel less than, or somebody's, you know, it just a whole big group of, you know, really connected, well-connected white people may have made a brown or a black person feel othered, and they might not have intended it to, but does that matter if the impact was there?
No, I think that's very right. And I think you're really what you're touching on there, back to that belonging piece again, but the lived experience. And as we know, everybody's lived experience will be very different because of, you know, it is your lived experience. So your lived experience, that cracked ceiling will possibly have been different to someone else's. So let's move on now to the first question, if we may. We'll just flash the question up just so our audience can see. But this question is really just carrying on really the theme we've just been talking about, which is the business case. What is the business case to firmly embed diversity and inclusion in the you know, in organizations? I don't think that's the slide you can see up now, but that's the question panel we're going to be talking about, which is what is the business case to why we firmly want to embed diversity, inclusion, and let's add belonging. Let's take Deborah's dib and add that in within organizations. We talked about to Damien as an employer. Lucy, let's come to you. NHS, you know, large, super large employer, as you heard from me earlier, looking to recruit, you know, lots of people into the NHS and broadly into the healthcare sector. What do you say about this particular question?
Well, in terms of a business case, I think it should be core business. You know, I don't think it is a thing that's nice to do. You know, we want to make sure that it's not tokenistic, that these inclusive recruitment policies are genuine, but they really affect and change the company culture. And, you know, at Health Education England, for example, we've got allies for the various underrepresented groups. You know, it's Lesbian Awareness Week this week. I wasn't even aware that that was a thing, but, you know, it's just nice to see that, you know, all of these different groups are being represented and they do feel inclusive. And I love Deborah's point about belonging. I think, you know, DIB is going to be the way forward, definitely from now on.
Gosh, I'm surprised about the Lesbian Awareness Week. I am one, and I wasn't even aware. Goodness me, God, that is. I know, but it is, isn't it? It's funny how you can get quite shocked by those things, and you shouldn't be, in the sense, why am I not aware of that? So thanks for that, Lucy. I mean, Jeff, just you know, obviously you represent a lot of organisations will be sitting, listening, and engaging with us on this in terms of providers, colleges, you know, the whole sector. If you look at the whole ecosystem, I mean, how well do you, let me just angle the question slightly differently. How well do you think we are as a sector embedding diversity, inclusion, because and belonging, because we do see those benefits?
Yeah, I think back to the strategies. I think we intellectually we know it's the right thing to do, whether it's a business case or not. We know it's the right thing to do. The question I have is a bit like what Deborah was saying about, you know, the sense of belonging. Do we check on a regular basis, whether people do feel as though they belong, whether people do feel as though they're included, and if not, then do we make those changes to our strategy? There's also something about the emotion. We buy into intellectually, but is the emotional buy-in always there? And it's back to that that party analogy. You know, for me, diversity is important, yes, but the larger, more important goal, I think, is true inclusion. That's where people feel respected, they feel valued, they feel free to speak their mind. You know, diversity is a bit like a party. You get invited to that party, it's there, you're diverse, but actually, is someone going to ask me to dance? And that's the difference. You know, do you really feel included at that particular party? And when you think about the workplace, the college workplace, for example, you know, from an education's perspective, we have no choice. Our client group is diverse. You know, they just turn up. They are all different in all their beauty, all their neurodiversity. So we've got no choice. So the only thing we really have an opportunity to change is our view on equity, which is what leg up do we give individual people to help them to take that next step? And actually, how do we behave? How do we react in terms of how do we include people? And we've got the means to do it in education. We've got the different technologies that we can use. We've got the pedagogies that we can change to include people. A bit like what Deborah was saying about how you treat people, how you work with people. I think the challenge for us is that we just have to work these things through, not see it as a challenge, not see it as a problem, but see it as something which we do as educators, and we know we can do it really well. So it's something about demystifying it and taking away the pain from diversity and inclusion, just making it part and parcel of what we do and how we believe.
Yeah. And it's interesting you raised the point about equity a moment ago. We'll come back to that later about the need for us maybe to just swing the equity pendulum, maybe to a particular extreme in order to create some balance. Deborah, did you just were you just wanting
Yes.
to... Yes.
Jeff, I just wanted to say, I was on a panel recently for International Women's Day, and somebody talked about the difference between being invited to the party and being asked to dance, and somebody else said something that I'd never heard before that I thought is a really good yes and to that, which is, are you asking everyone to fit into your dance? Like, that's the third bit, is belonging, because actually, if I go to if I'm invited to a party on the set of Bridgerton and everyone's doing a dance and I don't know the steps, it can be worse to be asked to dance. So do we ever say to, I think the problem with the word inclusion, which obviously it's a useful word and we need it and everything, but I would love for it to evolve past that, because I think the problem is, I mean, and I let me speak as myself rather than projecting anything onto anyone else. I am a white person, and we are sometimes, a lot of the time, absolutely rubbish at letting anyone be the architect of the space. And as a woman, I feel often, you know, industry was built, you know, thousands of banking, you know, generations and generations and generations, law before women were allowed in. So we've not been allowed to be the architect of the space. So when are we going to say, not you get to fit into this architecture that we've made, but actually you get to change the record and show us a dance that we have to learn? That's when it's going to shift.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really powerful point. Absolutely spot on. Yeah. Leah, can I just come to you for a sort of maybe a sort of a government angle on this, really, in terms of, and you know, do you feel enough is being done at a sort of government level, both local and national, to really understand the support that's needed to really embed and really create that pivot point, really, that Deborah's just touched on, really?
Well, we all know that more needs to be done. The problem is with human beings is that they get into a routine and they can be quite lazy, and they just carry on doing the same thing that they've always done because it's easier, you know, the route of least resistance. And you know, and everybody can be, you know, accused of doing that. What we've got to be able to do is have open, honest, nurturing environments in work where people can actually feel that they can say something. That they can actually call something out, or that they can say, no, why are we just carrying on like this? Because we are not seeing the benefit of a broader base to the company. We are not being able to connect with all of our customers properly. So there needs to be that nurturing environment as well, where people can have open and honest discussions where they're not going to be challenged back. And I think that most definitely is changing. But we really do have some issues as far as apprenticeships and recruitment is concerned. The other day there was in Apprenticeship Week, Minister Keegan was talking about recruitment, NHS recruitment, and what NHS is doing is going abroad to go and saying, oh yes, well, we do have a diverse workforce, but actually what we're not doing is recruiting at home a more diverse workforce. We're actually going abroad. I mean, what kind of crazy situation are we in? But that's because we're not thinking strategically. We are not thinking, in that long time frame of, you can't suddenly magic up a nurse or a police officer or a teacher. You've actually got to work on that from the start. And what we're not doing is getting to people with enough time to get them to understand what is out there and what's available, and that we're actually welcoming people. So that's where we need to look at, and that's what I'm working on with the Department for Education at the moment.
Yeah, because it sounds to me that's great to hear, but it sounds to me, Leah, that in a way the government, if they may well have it, but they probably do need to demonstrate they do have a strategy for diversity and inclusion and belonging.
Well, I think the government does. That the green benches have never been more diverse than ever before, and actually, that's great because people at home can see that we've got a properly multicultural society that we need to make sure is reflected everywhere. Yeah. And it's not reflected everywhere because we know we have pockets where we have more diverse mix of people as far as race might be. People will live in urban areas perhaps, but we also don't have diversity as far as people with disabilities are concerned. We don't have gender diversities, and they're all things that we really need to get grips with, and we need to get to grips with them very, very quickly.
Yeah, no, great, thank you. And you talked a moment ago about the having the conversation. There is something here about creating psychological safe spaces as well, which is, I think, all part of the belonging agenda. Let's move on now to question 2, and I'm going to bring in a couple of our panel who haven't had a chance to speak much yet, which is, how could apprenticeships be better used to address the workplace diversity challenge? Lauren, if I may, I'm going to come to you now, and of course, I don't want you to feel, because you're from City and Guilds, you need to shine the halo of love and light that we put onto this, but talk very openly about what you believe and what you've seen, not least because the work that you do representing lots of organisations who are trying to create more diverse and inclusive environments for apprentices to operate in. Just say a little bit about your experience, and then Damien, I'll come next to you if I may.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Kirstie. Morning, everyone. I would say, really just to echo everything that everyone else has really said so far. I guess for me, starting my first apprenticeship around 8 years ago now, just seeing how much more popular they've become and the awareness that's been raised, which is great. But just as everybody said, how do we make sure that as they become more popular, that everybody has the same opportunities for them? There's been a rise in that, ticking that little box that says, this percentage of our apprentices are female, this of our apprentices have come from ethnic minorities. But going forward, how many of that 40% of young women actually feel like they belong? How many of them feel like they have the same opportunities as their male counterparts? How many of them feel, as Leah said, they can actually use their voice and they can speak up, and that they've got that kind of valid seat at the table? So I think it's the whole recruitment piece is great, and that's where we start, if not before that, in that showing anyone of any age an apprenticeship is for. You're removing that initial stigma, I guess, which is, it's kind of going back one, that there is that stigma around apprenticeship still, which we're working so hard to kind of beat. But once they're in the job, how do we show that everybody has a seat at that table? Once you've been recruited, it's not just we've got you in the door and HR can tick that we're meeting those inclusion and diversity targets, but what is the retention like? Do these people stay? Do they feel welcome? Do they feel as if they've got a place? Are they progressing to higher roles? Are they now mentoring new apprentices coming in? So I think it's that whole piece of how do we attract, how do we recruit, but then also how do we nurture and how do we have them feel they belong is so important.
No, absolutely. You've just touched on a really important point, even about potentially apprenticeships for older workers. I mean, that's such an important part, I think, of what we're trying to create here in terms of that diversity, inclusion and belonging, and how we can have older apprentices and younger apprentices reverse mentoring. Damien, perhaps I'll bring you in at that point. I mentioned at the beginning how you've had a commendation for the work you've been doing in inclusion and diversity. I mean, how important is it for you to have had apprenticeships as part of demonstrating that richness of diversity and culture?
It's been absolutely fantastic for us. I mean, since the levy came in, obviously using apprenticeships, we've got more buy-in from the board, and obviously they want to suspend the levy. It was a big task to start with, but we started with the recruitment, and we've got apprentices now, but we've got a lot more female butchers in a male-dominant area. We've nearly doubled with that. Actually, one of our female butchers now, she's a team leader and a trainer in there, so we're really starting to see the impact. And don't get me wrong, it is challenging to start because you've got to change the mindsets of 50, 60-year-old directors that's always done it from just get as many as you can and get the production out the door sort of thing. But what's in our sector, butchers and stuff like that, we really do struggle. They're not out there, so you've got to make your own. You've got to
create a pipeline, yeah.
Create the pipeline, and it's been a massive success for us. And obviously, I said earlier that we've in the food sector, I visit other companies, and they're starting to struggle now because they've always relied on agency. They're quite like 70% now of their workforce is agency. And the retention's horrendous, whereas our retention now at 87%, we've seen a massive rise in retention, a massive rise in female butchers coming through. So it's it's been challenging. It's took a long time to get here. Even in my own company, arguing with directors and stuff like that, trying to get this model through. Yeah. But now they're seeing it on the bottom line. It's getting now they're throwing things at me. Can we get more? Can we do this? Can we do that? And it's impact on business.
So you've kind of got the traction, you've created the business case and then demonstrated the full range of benefits. Brilliant. Jeff, let me bring you on that, because I think Damien and Lauren have both touched on quite important points there. Around how do we get, there's still a lot of snobbery around the academic route of university versus an apprenticeship. We heard Deborah, just a brilliant example of being an apprenticeship comedian. I mean, what do we still need to do to try and get that to dissipate a little bit more? And then within that, how do we address the inclusion of so many more people from ethnic minorities into apprenticeships, which we know is a huge issue for us to address?
Yeah, I think of examples like Damien's are superb, where a company sees it actually hits the bottom line. The business case is just common sense. We have lots and lots of different people out there, people who are neurodiverse. There's a woman who works with us and she's autistic, but when she questions me, she gets more out of me than someone else who agrees with me, because she always disagrees. And then I have to be very clear in my answer. So, and it makes me think more clearly. So the business case is there. We've got lots of examples of that. So that's from the employer's perspective. We also have the tools in things like T-levels. We've got the apprenticeships where we can have people on work placements. Employers can work with individuals. We've got the mentoring schemes. As I said before, I think we've got lots and lots of different tools out there. And sometimes we don't tend to put these things together. We tend to do we do a T-level work down there. We'll do employee engagement over there in a college. We'll do recruitment over there in a college. There's something about getting organizations to think much more, and I hate the word, but think much more holistically about how they approach the whole process, and also about demystifying industry, demystifying things like engineering. If you do a Google search for Formula One chief engineers, the first two are women, and that's the second one is a woman. So that's what's out there. So it's about demystifying things. And also about finding those role models in industries which are probably less recognized for individuals. But I think we have the tools. It's just for some reason we don't get down to using them.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. And let me just bring briefly Lucy in on this question. Then I want to get to our last question, because I want to spend quite a bit of time on that one. I know how passionate you are, Lucy, about the role of apprenticeships within the NHS. What difference has it made? If you can just say briefly, that would be great.
I think for us, the whole ethos of widening participation, you know, it really has proved to be so successful. Certainly in terms of our degree apprenticeships, we are opening up those opportunities to people in the workforce that wouldn't have had the opportunity to study at that level, who couldn't afford to give up work. Now they're supported to get that career progression and that academic qualification. And, you know, retention has always been an issue. And we're seeing that these people, while they're being shown that they're being developed and that there's a career pathway, they're going to stay with us. You know, Leah mentioned international nurses. We are using apprenticeships as a real solid way to counteract that. Morally, in a pandemic, should we be recruiting overseas nurses? That's something we always wrestle with. But, you know, for us now, we know we've got a solid pipeline of nurses, nursing associates coming through the apprenticeship route, which is fantastic.
Brilliant. No, that's a really great illumination, actually, of, just as you say, how do we grow our own on an Uber scale? Because I think that's what this is also about, but also recognizing there is a whole host of skills that can come, and experience and diversity that can come from different countries as well, in terms of helping where we need it. It's always going to be a very difficult area to navigate through that one. So let's move on now to question 3. By the way, audience, there is the final poll question up there if you want to answer it, that we'll come to right at the end. So this third question really sort of touches on something, Jeff, you were talking about a moment ago. How can we better support underrepresented groups to consider jobs in different industries? And in fact, should we actually be even targeting the apprenticeship levy and all those tools that Jeff was talking about a moment ago into underrepresentation, and trying to swing that equity pendulum on some of those underrepresented groups? I mean, it was interesting, Jeff, your example you gave before. There was an article only in today's newspaper about GCHQ, who are now deliberately recruiting apprentices who are known, you know, to have dyslexia, because they spot patterns in things, they think very differently, and who would, you know, so that sort of sense of that, you know, neurodiversity that we wouldn't necessarily have talked about in the past, but we should be. And of course, we've got all sorts of examples where we know, let's take construction, where we know we're going to need 35,000 construction workers every year for the next goodness how many years. And yet how many women have got a career in construction? Yet what a fantastic industry. In fact, if anybody's interested, there is a petition right now going into government to try and mandate 25% of women into construction by 2026. So do have a look at that if you're interested in signing that. So let's come back to this question. How can we better support underrepresented groups? Deborah, I'm going to come to you for your angle on this one.
Well, I keep coming back to it, listening. And you have to sometimes go out to people in those groups and then prove to them you really do mean it. You prove to them, you know, if someone said to me, you know, if my career in comedy and, you know, all the stuff that I do in diversity and inclusion, and went, you know, for whatever reason, you know, we've just seen this with COVID. I mean, comedians have lost their whole income in the last year. Yeah. So if we came into a time where that was no longer tenable, but you said to me, Deborah, there's a great opportunity for you in construction, I would be like, thank you very much, no. Because I know that to be exclusionary. I've walked past building sites. I already know what that's going to be. And so you'd have to prove to me that's going to be different. Yep. And that, or that I have to be amongst these first few pioneers that are going to change it from within. There's a club called the Garrick Club, which is a very ancient, you know, hundreds of years old club for show business in London, and it's all kind of, you know, showbiz people. I will never apply to the Garrick Club, never. Do you know why? Do you know what it says on the door? No women. That's their policy. Now, I am sure in my lifetime the Garrick Club will open up membership to women. Will I apply? I don't think so. Do you know why? All the old members will not want me there. I know when I walk through the door as the first group of women, I'm going to let a whole other generation of women suck that up, because I'm like, oh, it's going to be tiresome. I'm going to have men tutting and turning their backs. Now, they would have to come to me and go, Deborah, you're the guilty feminist. You're known. If you join, other women will join. We're not going to shift it. We'll give you a free membership. We'll, you know, cocktails on arrival. We'll introduce you. We're going to have it. Would you like to run an event? Oh, then I'm going to come to the Garrick Club, because they're proving it to me. And I think that's the gap. And I think on the neurodiversity, we're really missing a trick here. I work for a company sometimes called SAP, who are tech. They have they're Scandinavian and they're always ahead. But in the Scandi group, and they're now extending this globally, they have to, their quota which they're filling is 1 in 100 neurodiverse people. And they said that's because, like, you know, Jeff was saying, that autistic people will point out things that no one else will see. So Greta Thunberg is autistic, and she says it's her autism that's made her go, it feels to me like the scientists have said we're in a burning building and all you neurotypical people are going, but it would be impolite to stop working. So we'd better finish the day. But the building's burning. And because she's neurodiverse and she's not clouded by all of our social niceties and conformity, she's gone, guys, I'm not going to school. I'm going to sit out the front and then I'm going to have a school strike. Can you see that picture of her? She's absolutely on her own. Is she on her own now? She is not. So you need neurodiverse people in your organisation because they will ask questions that nobody else will ask.
Yeah. No, I think that's really, I mean, I suppose though, you said something earlier that made me start to think about, do we then start to, you know, your view about the construction? Well, you wouldn't because you don't believe it's going to change. So does that mean that we do need to set quotas for things? Do you think setting targets, having quotas for things sometimes is a sort of necessary way of doing it, even though it may, you know, we know quotas can be quite divisive in their own right, can't they?
I mean, okay, here's an example. If you watch old episodes of QI, never mind the Buzzcocks, that kind of thing, you will see in some episodes, like I watched 2 or 3 back-to-back one time with my mum of QI. There was not one woman and they were all white men. And I know the guys down at QI, they're absolutely lovely guys. But at that time, the assumption was, these are the guys that could do the best job and we've got to put out the best show and it's going to be less funny. And that was genuinely their assumption. And I'm not singling out QI. They're just an example. There's loads. You know, Mock the Week was often all white men. Would I lie to you, which I'm doing very soon. You know, there's lots of, they basically were like that. The BBC said, you've got to have at least one woman on the panel. And they kicked off, you know, lots of producers, not all of them, but lots of them did kick off and say, but the show will be less funny. And comedians, female comedians said, well, I'll look like tokenized. And male comedians said, well, you know, I've earned my place here and she's here on a free ticket. Do you know what? A couple of years went by. Now it is nothing to see 2 or 3 women on those panel shows. Yep. It's normal. Yeah. It's normal. And do you know why? There's a pipeline. And I will tell you this, before, this is I want to do a documentary on this. Before the Second World War, women were funny. You go to a vaudeville night, look at any of the programs for vaudeville and music hall, over half the comedians were women. Yeah. But what happened was the pipeline froze up. And this is really important for the NHS and teaching, what you're talking about. Suddenly, to get on telly, when telly was invented and music hall closed down, the only pipeline to telly was working men's clubs, comedians in working men's clubs. Women weren't allowed there. And women weren't allowed or were frozen out of Footlights and those sort of posh university sketch groups. And so women have not been funny for 5 decades. But before the Second World War, we were hilarious. It's pipeline, gang. It's always pipeline. Check your pipeline, but you may need to convince women they want to be in your gang because they've had bad experiences or they've got or we project stuff onto it too. I'm projecting stuff onto construction that might not even be there anymore.
No, it's a really good point. It's a really good point. It just makes me reflect back to being a young girl and being taken to my dad's golf club and getting my dad kicked out when I marched into the snooker room because him and my brothers were playing snooker and girls weren't allowed. And I decided I was going in and playing regardless, not that I really cared about snooker. But there we go. Just brought back a memory there. But just let's stay on that point. Let's move to the fact that within our own sector, you talk about education, training skills. So within our own FE sector, amongst senior leaders, only 8.7% are identified as coming from Black, Asian or ethnic minority backgrounds. That's in 2020. And that's despite the fact that 23% of students, still not enough actually, in FE are from ethnic minorities. So there's clearly a hell of a lot we've still got to do. Jeff, if I may, I'm going to ask you to sort of comment on that.
Yeah, I think there's 2 things we need to do. There's something about getting people in the sector per se, getting them in at whatever level, you know, at the bottom level or the middle level. It's where we recruit from. You know, the sector needs people, needs people, all different types of people. And I think there's something about getting people in there and how we market the sector, how we promote it, where we go and look for individuals from. We tend to go through the same routes all the time to get people into the sector. There have to be different routes. You know, we can go to local organizations, we can go to faith groups, we can go to local communities, we can go to MPs. There are different ways of getting people into our sector, and I'm not sure we're always using different routes. The second thing is when people come into the sector, they come in new. What support do they get to help them to feel as though they belong.
Yeah.
You know, it's full of jargon, it's full of acronyms, etc. I don't know half the acronyms. So how do we get people to understand and feel comfortable within the sector? That's the idea of the mentoring, the coaching, that sort of support. And then again, at the top, you know, how do we help? How do we help people who are looking to be promoted, looking to get on?
Yeah.
Feel as though they belong, again, through things like coaching, etc. How do we support those senior managers who may well be all white and middle-aged? How do we support those senior managers in understanding that this isn't a threat, that this is something this is going to add to the diversity of thought around your table? It's going to add to your productivity. So I think there are a number of things that we should be doing, and you know, in a sense, colleges are doing these things.
Yeah.
But like Damien's example, one of the things that we have to do is to almost collate, curate, and to begin to share those examples of practice.
Yeah.
And that begins to shift mindsets. It no longer becomes a problem. It becomes something that people are actually doing. You know,
Yeah.
Dame's example is great. You know, what's happening, and we could all learn from that. So I think there's
Great.
something about organizations like AAC, ETF, etc., sharing those examples and helping others understand that it is possible and people are doing it.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jeff. I'm conscious of that clock ticking away now. So very, very brief, a couple of more brief reflections as we start to draw this to a close by looking at the final poll. Lauren, I mean, a lot of what Jeff said is exactly what you do in your day job all the time. Do you want to say a little bit more about that in say less than sort of 40 seconds?
Yeah, I guess it's really just back to those misconceptions. So exactly as Deborah said, you know, I think of construction, I think I don't want to work on a building site, so I rule it out. I think of the rail industry, I don't want to drive a train, so I'm going to rule that whole industry out. How do we open up and how do we show people of any age all the different jobs, the roles, the progression in all those industries, to stop them ruling out at that point? I go to events all the time and I see parents and they say, I can't do an apprenticeship. No, you can. You can do an apprenticeship. You can do a great apprenticeship. They're not just for your 16-year-old. So how do we get that message out, and how do we open it up sector-wise, gender-wise, age-wise?
Brilliant, brilliant. And Leah, I'm assuming you would very much agree with that, given the hat that you were in terms of supporting apprenticeships. Anything in like 20 seconds you want to add to what Lauren's just said there?
I mean, Lauren's absolutely spot on. I mean, the reality is that I spoke to some 14-year-olds a few weeks ago, and I said, why haven't you thought about choosing engineering? And they said, what's an engineer? And that's one of our problems, is that we have you know, a very, very scant knowledge about what the type of diversity of jobs are out there, but not only the jobs now, but the jobs in the future. And we've got to get a really, really big communications out there, because jobs are changing. You know, construction isn't just about a builder wearing a hard hat and holding a brick. In the future, it's going to be so different, and it's very different now. So we've got to communicate now.
Absolutely, and as we heard from Damien, there's opportunities for females to enter butchery, and as we heard from Lucy, lots of opportunities in the NHS for multiple careers, including those higher level opportunities as an apprentice nurse. So look, brilliant conversation. We could probably go on all day on this one, but we're going to now move to the last poll question. And actually, Deborah, just so you've got a little bit of warning, not that you ever need it, because you're never short of anything to comment on brilliantly, is I'm going to ask you just to really comment on the poll results. So the poll had actually 5 very long options, really. So I'm going to try and paraphrase them, because you can't see the poll question, unfortunately. How could we increase levels of diversity in apprenticeships? That was the question. How do we increase levels of diversity in apprenticeships? There were 5 choices, and the choices were: we target apprenticeships for underrepresented groups, or we target more higher level apprenticeships, again, for underrepresented groups, or we dedicate more outreach by employers to encourage underrepresented groups, or we have more part-time apprenticeship opportunities to be created, or the government do more to support employers to encourage recruitment from underrepresented groups. So you'll see there the theme was all about different sort of ways to attract underrepresented groups. Our audience had to pick one. I mean, they're all quite similar, really. There wasn't really an out winner. I think the two that really showed was dedicated outreach by employers among underrepresented groups. So people like Damien and Lucy and other employers getting out there, construction companies talking about and targeting underrepresented groups. And then the other one was more government support to employers to encourage recruitment from underrepresented groups. So a bit of a role there for government. So Deborah, any views on that?
Yeah, they were the two I would have picked, because I actually think if you look at what Marcus Rashford did for school dinners, he just stood up and went, I needed school dinners, and now I'm one of your favourite football players. Join the Dot gang. And he shamed the government into, so it basically made them feel like Mr. Bumble from Dickens, and they went, oh no, we're not stealing lunch from children, Marcus Rashford, who we love. And similarly, I think if you could get some young or older Black, Asian people in the industries that you want apprentices to go into schools, and pay those people for their time, because, you know, let's be honest, old white men aren't being asked to go into schools to say, you could be a plumber, white boys. That's not happening. So, you know, pay those people for their time and train them to speak well. You know, have someone work with them to come up with a really funny, engaging speech, take questions from the kids, have female plumbers and, you know, train drivers or whatever go into schools and say, girls, this is a really fun job, and tell the funny stories, the engaging stories and that kind of thing. That's what we need, I think, to encourage and renew, just to see representation. It's so much, you can be what you can't see, but it's much harder. And I think in terms of the government, 100%, if they were to say, we're going to chip in some, if you take on a woman in this male-dominated environment, we'll chip in, suddenly there's a financial incentive, that's going to shift very, very quickly. Because of course, if you can get an apprentice for a quarter, you know, a quarter off or half price, you'd be it'd be odd not to have a go at that, and lots of people would. So I think those are the two that I would choose, and I think that the gang has chosen wisely.
Brilliant. Well, listen, thank you so much, Deborah. And look, what a great, but also more importantly, what a really important, vital debate to be having right now. I mean, I think we probably all would agree this is our moment to kind of look ahead and to start to address, to put right, really, what have probably been mostly ignorant, poor decisions, lack of action, all of the above, and probably much more. And to now really make some really hard choices around what we're going to do to swing that equity pendulum, as we said, more broadly around inclusion and belonging. And we do need to accept we've not got it right yet as a society, as an employers, and within the broader skills ecosystem, and of course including in government. So I think creating diversity in our society and workplaces via skills and apprenticeships, I think we can probably agree, is going to be essential as we go forward and we look to a COVID pandemic recovery. But we need to measure it, we need to be held account for it, and we need to do it now. So thank you, our audience. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I hope you can tell I and the panel have. I think some great reflections to take back into your own organisations with some real positive intent to act. Let's take away Deborah's dib and see what we can do with it across the sector. Thank you to our great panel of Lucy and Leah and Damien and Jeff, and of course Lauren, and then our very special guest Deborah. Massive round of applause. It's very difficult to do applause on exactly, we can make a bit of noise, but there we go. So I'm going to hand back to the organisers with just 8 seconds to go, and enjoy the rest of this fantastic AAC conference. Thank you very much, everybody. Take care, stay well, and enjoy the long weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.